This happened a couple of years ago. At the time, I was living with my parents in a sprawling old 3-bedroom apartment in a historic building. I always loved animals, but for some reason, they never lasted long in our house. They either died or ran away for unexplained reasons. There were many times when a pet would get severely sick, and in a miserable state, we would give it away to a different home. And literally, a week later, in a new house, animal would miraculously revive, become completely healthy, and live for many years. At first, I blamed it all on my own irresponsibility and inability to care for them. But one day, when I got a dog, I looked at it from a completely different perspective. My dog was constantly staring at something. It would sit in the middle of the room and stare into empty corners as if it saw something we didn't see. Sometimes it would bark aggressively at empty doorways and growl, baring its teeth. I tried to logically explain it to myself by thinking that it probably just heard the noise of the neighbors behind the old walls. But one night, I was lying in my bed. The apartment was submerged in silence. Suddenly, I heard the thick power cables from my laptop scattered across the floor start moving loudly. It sounded exactly like someone heavy had caught their feet in them and was dragging them across the hardwood floor. I thought it was my dad getting up for water. I called out to him into the dark, but nobody answered me. Then I called for my mom. Nothing. My only answer was the sound of someone's breathing coming from right out in the hallway. Deep, raspy breathing that did not sound human whatsoever. Shivers ran down my spine. I yelled, "Hey, stop messing around," hoping it was just a prank. No answer followed. I forced myself to get up and walked out into the dark hallway to see who was there. There was no one. I carefully peeked into my parents' room. They were fast asleep. At that exact moment, my dog started owling in the living room. It was a long, pitiful owl full of pure fear. And that is when I started to feel truly terrified. A couple of weeks later, the situation escalated. My parents went away for the weekend, and I was left to sleep at home absolutely alone. I watched a movie, turned off the lights everywhere, and went to bed. Barely had I settled under the blanket when a sound echoed. Someone knocked clearly 3 times on the wooden door of the bathroom. Probably any person knows exactly how a knock sounds on every specific door in their own house. I froze. I stopped breathing. A dead, oppressive silence fell over the apartment. I started calming myself down, thinking I just imagined it. But then came 3 more loud, slow knocks, this time on the front door. I jumped out of bed. I was shaking. I grabbed my phone and immediately called my older brother, Mark, who lived just a 10-minute walk away from me. I started hysterically explaining to him that someone was inside the apartment. He told me not to panic and to calm down. He advised me to walk up to the door and look through the peephole. I did exactly that. I walked down the long hallway toward the front door, turning off the lights in every single room along the way to feel safe. But the second I reached the front door, the lights in the entire apartment violently shut off. The power was cut. I was completely paralyzed by shock in the darkness. I pressed my face against the door and looked through the peephole. I could clearly see that the lights in the hallway outside were still on. The problem was only inside my apartment. I started crying into the phone from fear and begged Mark to come to me. He said, "I'm leaving right now. Lock yourself in the..." But he couldn't even finish his last sentence before my phone simply shut off. The screen went black. The battery couldn't possibly be dead because it had been on the charger all day. I was left in suffocating darkness. I gathered my courage and with a determined but trembling step walked to the pantry for candles. I lit a candle, took it in my hand, and walked back to my room, whispering prayers for all of this to stop. And then I heard footsteps inside the apartment, right in the hallway. At first, they were slow, heavy steps, and then someone bolted and literally ran into my room. The sound of the footsteps stopped right in front of me in the gloom. From that visceral fear, I started having severe gag reflexes. I rushed into the bathroom and I literally threw up from the sheer stress. And then I heard a sharp ring from the intercom. I was incredibly surprised because I knew that if there was no power in the apartment, the intercom shouldn't be working either. I ran out into the hallway. Barely had I reached the door when suddenly a loud knock echoed again. I froze, expecting the worst, but then I instantly heard Mark's voice behind the door. Sighing with massive relief, I clicked the lock and threw the door open. At that exact moment, like a snap of the finger, the lights turned back on the entire apartment. And immediately, I heard the chime of my phone turning itself back on in my bedroom. Mark stood on the threshold. He had also seen the lights suddenly turn on by themselves, and now he was looking at my face, which was as pale as a chalk. We sat in the kitchen that entire night without closing our eyes. After that incident, the entity stopped hiding. Everyone in the household began to constantly hear someone heavy walking around the apartment. Dishes would shatter on their own, wires would fly through the air. Relationships in the family became incredibly tense. We were always fighting because of that oppressive feeling. Soon, we made the decision to move out immediately. We sold the apartment, new tenants moved in. Literally a month later, these new tenants called up early in the morning. They tearfully asked if we had ever noticed anything unusual in that apartment. We shuddered and answered negatively, hiding the truth. Then, with a trembling voice, they told us what happened. During the night, they heard the horrific scream and crying of their infant daughter. They ran into the nursery in the panic, and what they saw made them freeze in absolute horror. Their baby wasn't lying in the crib. The baby was suspended in the air 3 feet off the floor. The little girl was choking as if someone large and invisible was tightly holding her by the throat. As soon as the adults entered the room and screamed, the invisible hand sharply released its grip. The infant fell to the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. The little girl suffered a concussion that night. What that creature was and how those people are living now, I don't know. I hung up the phone and never contacted them again. But every single day, I thank God that we moved out of that cursed apartment in time. One day, after a long day of wandering through the dense forest, a hunter was caught in the middle of the thicket by a stormy night. It had already gotten dark, freezing rain began to fall, and having no idea of his location, he decided to keep walking in one direction until he made it out of the woods. After several grueling hours of walking, he stumbled into a small clearing, in the middle of which stood a wooden cabin. Realizing he had no chance and could freeze to death, he decided to stay in the cabin for the night. The door was unlocked, and no one was inside. The hunter, exhausted to the bone, lay down on the single creaky bed. Looking around the dark cabin, the hunter was surprised to find that all the walls were decorated with several portraits painted in great, intricate detail. Without exception, all the pale faces in the portraits stared at him maliciously and with clear threat. The hunter felt extremely uncomfortable under their piercing gazes. Ignoring the faces in the paintings that glared at him with hatred, he turned to face the wooden wall, covered himself with his jacket, and quickly fell asleep. The next morning, he woke up to bright sunlight hitting his face. Looking around the bright room, he froze. He saw that there were absolutely no portraits on the walls in the cabin. There were only windows. I was always deeply drawn to anatomy, and I genuinely wanted to be useful to sick people. Therefore, I enrolled in a prestigious medical school in Boston, Massachusetts. This chilling incident happened during my first year of studies, back in the 90s. As medical students, we regularly had practical classes in the university's old underground morgue. We participated in autopsies, practiced dissection, and assisted the senior doctors. On one of those long, exhausting days, toward the late evening, our practical classes finally came to an end. The professor left, and all the students, as usual, headed to the locker room showers attached to the morgue to wash off the heavy, clinging stench of formaldehyde. That evening, I stayed behind a little late. I was putting away my instruments and went to the showers when the rest of the students had already left. I spent about 15 minutes getting cleaned up, changed into my everyday clothes, and headed for the exit. To get to the main stairwell, my path required me to walk back through the large dissection hall. It was a long, freezing room where sheet-covered cadavers lay on the metal tables prepared for tomorrow's examinations. I quickly walked past the silent bodies, trying not to look at them. I reached the heavy metal door leading to the main corridor and pushed down on the handle. It didn't budge. I yanked it harder, but it was locked from the outside. The security guard must have assumed the basement was completely empty and locked everything down for the night. For some time, I aggressively tortured the door handle. Then I started knocking loudly and kicking the heavy metal with my boots. But the old door didn't even flinch. Time passed, and it was getting very late. I pressed my ear against the cold steel, but there were absolutely no sounds, footsteps, or signs of human presence outside. I didn't have a cell phone to call for help, especially since it was the 90s. Panic began to creep into my mind. How could they forget about me? I started screaming, hoping someone on the upper floors would hear me. After losing my voice, I finally realized with horror that there were no living people left in the building, just me and these covered bodies. I tried to calm myself down, deciding I would just have to endure this night and wait for the morning shift. But suddenly, with loud electric click, the industrial fluorescent lights on the ceiling shut off. The building's automatic timer had triggered. The massive hall was plunged into pitch-black darkness. The only source of light now was the faint, eerie greenish glow from the emergency exit sign above the locked door. The thick darkness made the freezing hall feel absolutely suffocating. Finally, accepting my fate, I huddled into the far corner of the room, pulling my knees tightly to my chest. I closed my eyes, deciding to simply kill time by sleeping. The morgue was unnaturally quiet. I had just begun to doze off when the faint sound sliced through the silence. I tensed up, my eyes snapping open in the dark. It sounded like a soft rustle of fabric. I stared into the gloom, my heart racing, but I couldn't see anything moving. I took a deep breath and began to rationalize the fear away. It's just an old building settling, I told myself. It's a ventilation system, or just my sleep-deprived brain playing cruel tricks on me. I waited in tense silence for another 5 minutes. When nothing else happened, the heavy blanket of exhaustion finally took over. I convinced myself it was just a hallucination, rested my head on my knees, and slowly drifted back into a light, uneasy sleep. But I wasn't asleep for long. A sudden, much louder noise jolted me awake. This time, there was absolutely no denying it. It wasn't the building, and it wasn't the wind. It was the distinct sound of heavy plastic sliding against the wet metal. It came directly from one of the autopsy tables in the center of the room. My breathing completely stopped. I peered into the green lit gloom, my heart beating so hard my ribs physically ached. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I noticed movement. The thick white sheet covering one of the bodies slowly, jerkily slid off the edge and fell onto the floor. I covered my mouth with both hands to keep from screaming out loud. The silhouette of a grown man was slowly sitting up on the stainless steel table. His movements were incredibly stiff and mechanical, as if he was fighting through deep rigor mortis. There was a sickening, wet crunch of popping joints in the silent room. Then, the corpse slowly swung its rigid legs over the edge of the table and slid down. Its bare, dead feet touched the cold tiled floor with a heavy, wet slap. He stood there for a few seconds, swaying slightly, trying to find his balance, and then the absolute most terrifying thing I could have ever imagined happened. Out of all the vast, dark space in that massive hole, he noticed me cowering in the corner. He slowly turned his head directly toward me. What I saw in the faint, sickly green emergency light was permanently burned into my brain. He had no eyes, just black, gaping eye sockets staring directly into my soul. His pale, stiff jaw was moving up and down, opening and closing silently, as if he was trying to say something to me from beyond the grave. An animalistic, paralyzing fear pinned me entirely to the wall. I blinked hard, praying desperately that it was just a severe sleep paralysis, a horrific, vivid nightmare that I would wake up from. But when I opened my tear-filled eyes, the creature took its first clumsy, dragging step right toward me. He was walking, swinging his arms awkwardly, close in the distance. My survival instinct finally broke the paralyzing spell. I jumped to my feet, let out the loudest, most primal scream of my entire life, and bolted for the heavy metal door. I began pounding on it frantically with both fists, smashing my knuckles against the steel until they bled, sobbing wildly and begging for anyone to help me. I looked over my shoulder in pure panic. The corpse was only a few feet away from me now. Its long, gray, decaying arms were reaching out for my face. The empty eye sockets locked onto mine. Its ice-cold fingers were mere inches away from touching my skin. I squeezed my eyes shut tightly, crying, fully expecting the absolute end. And in that exact terrifying second, the heavy door behind my back crashed wide open. I fell backward into the brightly lit corridor, collapsing right into the arms of the startled night watchman. He had heard my desperate screaming during his routine patrol. The bright beam of his powerful flashlight cut deeply through the darkness of the anatomy lab. I looked back over his shoulder in absolute terror, but the hall was completely empty. There were no standing silhouettes. All of the dead bodies were lying peacefully on their steel tables, tightly and perfectly covered with their white plastic sheets. I spent the rest of the night in the security booth, shivering violently under the warm blanket and drinking liters of hot tea. When I hysterically told the old watchman what I saw, he didn't look surprised at all. He just nodded silently and smirked grimly, as if it wasn't the first time he had heard such a horrifying thing. Despite that living nightmare, I didn't quit medicine. I became a doctor, but since that night, I never, under any circumstances, stay alone in dark rooms. The suffocating summer heat was making an already hopeless situation completely unbearable. I had been wandering through the dense forest for over an hour, and the cold realization was sinking in. I had completely lost my way back. There was absolutely zero signal on my phone. not a single bar. Any attempts to listen through the thick canopy of leaves, hoping to catch the distant hum of the interstate, were completely useless. There was nothing but the heavy, oppressive silence of the deep woods. Why did I come out here alone? I cursed myself out loud. I had decided to go off trail just to snap a few cool photos of untouched nature, and this was the result. I had wandered so deep into the woods that every single tree started looking exactly the same. I didn't pack survival gear for this. In my backpack, I had exactly 2 protein bars and a half-empty bottle of warm water. That would keep me going for the next few hours, but what about after that? I forced my way through the thick underbrush, stepping over sleek, mossy roots and trying desperately not to twist an ankle on the hidden rocks. I knew for a fact that nobody was coming to look for me. My few friends were out of town. Everyone had scattered for summer vacations. I was stuck in the city alone, too broke to travel. I was entirely on my own. Search and rescue wouldn't even start looking for me for days, probably not until I failed to show up for work on Monday. Dusk started to settle in. The shadows from the massive trees grew longer, turning the forest into a dark, confusing maze. I realized that walking in the pitch black was a death silence. I'd end up breaking my neck in the hidden ravine. I needed to build a shelter for the night. Thank God there weren't many large predators in this part of the woods. I decided to construct a crude lean-to shelter out of the fallen branches and a heavy pine bough. Scavenging for the right branches took another 2 hours. By the time I finished assembling my pathetic little hut, the sun had completely dipped below the horizon. The forest plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. I tossed my backpack into the shelter and was just about to crawl in after it when I suddenly froze. Off in the distance, cutting through the dense trunks of the trees, I saw lights. They were 3 dim, glowing orange orbs. They emitted a soft, warm, almost pulsating light. 2 of them were hovering perfectly still, while the third one was slowly moving in the mesmerizing circular pattern. To this day, I still don't understand why my survival instincts completely shut down at that moment. Why didn't I just stay inside my safe, dry shelter? Instead, moving like I was under some kind of spell, I took a step away from my camp and walked toward the lights in the dark. I kept walking and walking, but the lights weren't getting any closer. It felt like with every step I took, they retreated by the exact same distance, luring me deeper into that thicket. I quickly discarded the comforting illusion that it might be a ranger's cabin. I stopped, suddenly realizing the massive mistake I had just made. I turned around and realized I had completely lost sight of my shelter. I was standing in the middle of nowhere, without my backpack, without water, in pitch darkness. Panic slammed into my chest. My heart started hammering. My breathing turned into shallow gasps. Just to my left, a heavy branch snapped loudly. I flinched and instinctively looked back at the glowing orange lights, and as soon as my eyes focused on their soft, warm glow, the panic simply evaporated. My body felt incredibly light. My mind clouded over with a thick, comforting fog. Something was whispering directly into my brain. It is safe there. It's warm. There are people there. They will help you. On rubbery legs, I stumbled toward them. I didn't even notice that the number of lights was multiplying. There were dozens of them now. They were bobbing rhythmically in the dark, and now they were moving toward me. Have you ever seen how deep-sea angelfish hunt? It is terrifyingly brilliant. At the very bottom of the ocean, when there is nothing but crushing absolute darkness, this fish has a flashy appendage on its head that glows. A bioluminescent lure. Smaller fish see this beautiful warm light in the abyss. They swim toward it, feeling drawn to the safety of the glow. And when they swim just close enough, massive jaws filled with hundreds of needle-like teeth snapshot from the darkness. I pushed through the dense bushes until I stumbled into a small clearing. The glowing orbs were right in front of me, almost at arm's length, and then all the lights turned off at the exact same time. The trance broke. My mind snapped back to reality in a split second. I realized I could finally run, but it was far too late. In the dim, pale light of the moon, I finally saw what was standing all around me. They weren't human. They were creatures. There were at least a dozen of them. They looked like massive, grotesque black leeches, but with long, spindly, multi-jointed arms and legs. They started closing the circle around me. An atrocious stench hit my nose. The smell of rotten meat mixed with burnt rubber. My stomach violently lurched. They moved with a wet, disgusting sound. A few of them flickered their orange lights back on, illuminating their faceless, slimy, glistening bodies. Hot tears of absolute terror streamed down my cheeks. Realizing I had absolutely nothing left to lose, I let out a feral scream and charged directly through their horde. I shoved through them with my shoulders. The second I touched their slimy skin, I felt a searing, agonizing pain like burning acid. Their long, clawed hands shredded my sweater, desperately trying to drag me back into the darkness. 3 branches wiped across my face, tearing my skin and drawing blood, but I didn't stop. I ran completely blind through the woods, and they didn't fall back. Right behind my neck, I could hear a sound like a wet hand rubbing violently against thick rubber, and that wet squelching. Suddenly, the ground vanished beneath my feet. I tripped and tumbled violently down a steep, rocky slope, crashing through thorns and slamming into boulders until everything finally went black. I woke up late the next morning. The bright sun was blinding my eyes. I was lying in a deep drainage ditch, and just a few yards away, cars were zooming by on a paved interstate. I had survived. Tumbling down that steep drop-off had saved my life. They didn't follow me down to the asphalt. I was covered in mud and dried blood. Across my arms, neck, and back were horrific, corrosive chemical burns from where they had grabbed me. I limped onto the shoulder of the road and hitched a ride to the nearest town. Going back into those woods to find my backpack wasn't even an option in my mind. After that, I spent a lot of time with a therapist. Of course, he didn't believe a word of it, blaming the entire thing on extreme stress, dehydration hallucinations, and toxic plant exposure. I went through rehab, and eventually my life mostly returned to normal, but that night still lives in my head. I frequently wake up in a cold sweat, swearing I can hear that wet squelching sound in my bedroom. If you're listening to this story right now, I want to give you one piece of advice. If you ever find yourself out in the woods at night, for whatever reason, and suddenly off in the distance, cutting through the trees, you see a soft, pulsating orange light, look away. Close your eyes and run in the exact opposite direction as fast as your legs can carry you, because I know for a fact they are still out there, waiting. I was born in 1980 and grew up in a small, dying steel town in Ohio, right in the heart of the Rust Belt. It was a very special, unique time. Everything felt somehow easy and uncomplicated. Everyone knew each other, and the exact same families lived in the exact same houses for decades. I still visit my hometown once a year, and it feels like absolutely nothing has changed there. The same old neighbors, the same cashiers in the local stores that survived. But what I remember most from my childhood is my middle school years. Life in the early 90s was completely different. We didn't have smartphones, social media, or modern consoles. We spent our days outside, riding our bikes until the streetlights came on. It was a glorious, carefree time, but it was also when I had the most terrifying experience of my entire life. It was the first and hopefully the absolute last time I ever encountered the supernatural, and I still cannot forget it, even after all these years. I was in the 7th grade, making me about 12 years old. As always, my group of friends and I were hanging out late. It was around 10:30 at night. We were sitting in the dark alleyway, swapping urban legends and ghost stories. Teenage arrogance was in full swing, and my youthful maximalism made me want to prove that I wasn't afraid of anything. Not far from our neighborhood stood an old, partially condemned school building. It looked incredibly menacing in the dark. The dare was simple but terrifying. Break in through the front entrance, sneak past the night watchman, run up to the 3rd floor, open a specific window, and look out at the courtyard. It had to be done in pitch-black darkness, because I absolutely hated feeling weak or giving the other guys a reason to doubt my courage. I foolishly volunteered to do it. As soon as I agreed to the dare, I instantly felt my status rise among the guys. We had 7 people in our group. Riding that massive wave of adrenaline and superiority, I walked to the old school. Standing on the crumbling concrete porch, I peeked through the dirty glass. The night watchman was fall asleep at his desk, his heavy breathing audible even through the thick door. I carefully pulled the door open and slipped into the dusty lobby. I crawled on my stomach right past the guard, slipped behind the concrete pillar, and got to my feet. My friends were supposed to wait outside in the courtyard by the window. I was now on the 1st floor, in total, suffocating darkness without a flashlight. I blindly felt my way along the cold metal lockers to the stairwell. I moved agonizingly slowly. One wrong step and I could fall because it was so dark you couldn't see your own hand. It took me 10 minutes to creep up to the 2nd floor and another 10 to reach the 3rd. As soon as my foot hit the landing of the 3rd floor, my heart stopped. I heard a voice echoing loudly from the very bottom of the stairwell. It was one of my best friends yelling frantically, "Run away, quick! Run back down!" Deep anxiety hit my chest, but just as I turned around to head back down, I heard another shout coming from the courtyard, right outside the open window. It was the exact same friend who had just called me from the stairs. He screamed, "Don't go anywhere! Stand perfectly still and don't move!" I wasn't just scared anymore. I was absolutely paralyzed with a visceral dread. Then, from the dark stairwell below me, the first voice yelled again, "Hurry up and run down! I'm right here! Don't listen to anyone!" I froze, completely immobilized, hot tears streaming down my face. I didn't know what to do, who to believe, or where to run. The voice from the stairwell screamed again, but now it sounded like a bizarre chorus of several guys from my group speaking at once. "There is nobody in the courtyard. We're all standing down here. Do not go to the window. We're coming up." Suddenly, an unnatural, guttural roar echoed through the entire building, and the voices from the stairs shouted in perfect unison, "Run! I screamed hysterically and blindly sprinted down the dark hallway, completely ignoring the window. Heavy thudding inhuman footsteps were rushing up the stairs right behind me. "Don't go to the window! Don't go forward!" The mimicking voices from the stairs shrieked. At the exact same time, a voice from the open window roared, "Jump!" I hit a dead end in the hallway. The things from the downstairs were rushing up, and I was crying and screaming, trapped in the nightmare. Suddenly, my frantically searching hand brushed against a cold metal doorknob at the very end of the corridor. I yanked the heavy door open, slipped inside, and slammed it shut behind me. I found myself in a cramped utility closet. There was a metal ladder attached to the wall leading up to the roof hatch. Without a single second of hesitation, I scrambled up the rungs, pushed the heavy iron hatch open, and crawled out onto the flat, gravel-covered roof. My heart almost stopped beating entirely. Sitting right there on the roof, huddled together, was my entire group of friends. I screamed in terror, "Don't come near me!" One of my friends rushed over, pushed me hard in the shoulder, and hissed, "Are you a complete idiot? We climbed up here using the rusted fire escape. The very second we heard someone calling your name inside the school." I stared at him in absolute shock, my mind completely breaking down. "Wait," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Then who was standing by the window down there?" "We didn't even make it to the window," he replied, shaking like a leaf. "We were walking behind the school, and then we heard our own voices coming from the dark courtyard, and we got terrified." The voices inside the school had gone completely silent, but we were way too terrified to even peek over the edge of the roof. We sat up there shivering until 7 in the morning, until the bright sun came up and the normal people started walking on the streets below. We climbed down the fire escape and never spoke of that horrific story out loud again. But I will remember that terrifying night for the rest of my life.